Welcome, everyone. I'm assuming you can hear me. We've done all the proper testing and everything. I just want to welcome to the Amplified Marriage virtual workshop that we have going on now. This is our first webinar, doing it over Zoom, quite like this. And so, My name is Brian, and this is my wife Natalie. And we're very excited to be able to share some of the things that we've been walking through, some of the things that we've learned over these last few years in regards to communication and expectations and some things like that. So for the last 4 or 5 years, we've really done a lot of coaching with married couples, spending time with them, living life with them, and being able to walk them through. And so the topic that we've chosen tonight is actually on unmet expectations. And so we just want to kind of give you a bit of an itinerary as to how the evening is going to look. We're here for about an hour and 15 minutes. And we're going to go from 7 to about 8:15. The last 15 or 20 minutes, I do want to open it up for some question and answer times. You'll see in the bottom of the bar that we have a couple things going on. There's a chat and there's a Q&A. And so if you want to have some questions answered at the very end, I have Ryan and Joy. They are co-hosting with us, and they're going to make sure that the questions end up in our hands for the end of it. So throughout this whole webinar, if you have a question or just you want some clarity on something, we just really encourage you to take the time, write the question down, and we'll do our best to get to as many as we can. Who knows if it's a question that we didn't get to answer, maybe it'll turn into one of our podcast topics for the day. So we're just excited to be able to be here. So there's two things. Again, it's the Q&A button. If you have any questions throughout, if it's related to this, if it's related to something else that you're maybe curious about, we'd love the opportunity to be able to chat with you. The other is we have some questions that we're going to be popping up for you to answer as we go through the thing or through this whole evening. So
like when we get to that part, we'll kind of give a little bit of an explanation on
as to why we want you to answer the question. So it's going to be very good. So the way things have been working out, the topic that we're talking about is the unmet expectations. And there's something that we've really kind of learned over the last little while, that simple miscommunications can create significant barriers in a marriage or a relationship, and often share a common source, and it's the unmet expectations.
That's right. I think like in our marriage, and we've been married for 19 and a half years, that has been kind of the thing that keeps popping up with everyone kind of that we're talking with, and the people that we've met with, and pre-marriage counseling and over the years, and marriage counseling. It seems to be kind of the topic that gets people stumped and gets people stuck on it. So we've struggled so much with unmet expectations and just expectations in general, and thinking that we're communicating them when really we're not. So
there's a saying, even when I was in sales, if you think you've communicated enough, you haven't, communicate some more. And so what's the very first question?
So we're going to pose a question here that we want you to, it's a polling question. Are my expectations realistic? And you'll see when you click on that there's a section for the ladies to answer, and that's for us women to really take a self-reflective look. Are my expectations that I have for myself, that I have for my spouse or partner, are they realistic? Yes, no, sometimes never. And then the men also have that opportunity to answer in their own little category. You'll see number 2 there, are my expectations realistic? The gentleman answers. And I really encourage you when you're answering these not to ask for clarification from your partner.
Right.
Just answer them do you feel like your expectations are realistic?
Right. And so we're going to send this off. We're going to give you a couple minutes. We're going to play some Jeopardy theme music as we go along. But here's the question. Well, we're gonna move on as some people continue to answer the question. But the very first one is when we're talking about expectations and communicating with your partner, whether you've been dating for a long time or for a little time, or you've been dating for 30 years or 19 and a half years. When we're talking about expectations, people want their expectations to be known.
That's right.
So you want to make the expectations known. So you want to identify what they are. Also, a big thing is that there's a lot of unspoken expectations that people have.
That's right. people think about, but then don't articulate them. And so it's one of those things, and maybe you can identify where I've thought about something that kind of bothers me, or that I'm expecting Brian to just know because he's my husband, or he's, you know, at that time too, he was my boyfriend, and I'm just expecting him to read my mind.
Right.
So to speak. And those unspoken expectations, those are the silent killers of relationships.
Right.
We a lot of our arguing has stemmed from that very thing of just being unspoken.
And not even talked about, not spoken, not talked about in passing, just things that people carry that they're on there. So if you have expectations for your partner, but you never communicate those expectations, you're setting yourself up for complications down the road. And what we mean by that is that if you're not communicating those expectations, even in the moment at all, and why we say it brings up issues is because it's really easy for communication or about the expectation to kind of get pushed to the side. Your feelings may be hurt, but you didn't say anything, and then slowly things begin to pile up, and it gets worse and it gets worse, and you don't actually deal with the expectation. You don't talk about it, and instead of ever dealing with it, you just keep having more and more arguments, and you're not really talking about the actual issue that's happening.
So a story that I was reminded of was when coming to expectations. So how I was raised really played into sort of what I adopted as far as what I expected from my spouse. And so my dad, for example, he took care of sort of like the jobs that my mom deemed were the man jobs to do, such as like the oil change and gas, and making sure the car was always washed, and making sure that oil changes were done, and anything like vehicle related, she really felt like that was the man's job. And so growing up, I was like, well, clearly that must be the man's job. And I placed that on Brian without even realizing that, one, it was an expectation that I wanted because I just adopted it. We hadn't actually talked about what those roles were or what I expected as far as that went. I just thought, well, he's a guy and cars seem to fall in that category. So he must be in charge of those things. And it really began to I began to harbor resentment when I was filling up the car with gas, or I was making sure and booking the oil appointments and whatever. I was the one vacuuming the car out and cleaning the car. It just became a real source of contention between us because I had simply not voiced that, hey, this is what I'm expecting. And quite frankly, didn't even realize that maybe I hadn't even thought, is this something that I want to take on? Is this something that I want as an expectation? I just grabbed hold of it and ran with it.
Right. And what we like, just for even another perspective, sometimes what we do is we carry expectations from previous relationships or the way we were raised. And because you didn't communicate them with your spouse or your fiance, or when you're just early engaged or you're early dating, and you get to that place, because you're carrying those things in for other relations, sometimes it's baggage, sometimes it's just things you didn't even know about. You often bring that in with the person that now you're living with or possibly going to be married to for the rest of your life. And you're making those decisions, but all you're doing is having someone else's expectation on the person you're with.
That's right.
And so you actually rob that person that you're with of the opportunity to fulfill the actual expectations that you have. And it could be that the expectations that you have that came in are healthy, okay expectations. We're not saying that they're negative. But what we're saying is that if you don't have that conversation, you never know what it is. And it could be something hidden that ends up just causing issues unnecessarily in your relationship.
Right. And then when we did marriage counseling, because that was a thing to do, or pre-marriage counseling, I should say, and we scored 20% in marriage expectations. So we're speaking from that place, and we're not alone actually in expectations being kind of a low scorer on that test, and rightfully so, because I mean, you know what you know. Yeah. Or you don't know what you don't know. And so you're kind of just going through and being like, yeah, well, like, we're talking about everything, but or the things that matter, I should say, the big
Right,
things like
right.
finances and paying bills and children and who's going to stay home if that's an
Right.
option, like kind of those big things. But what we didn't talk about was, okay, what was the expectations from my childhood that I kind of adopted from my parents, and what were your expectations from his childhood? And then coming together and like, what do we like about those expectations that we saw as children that our parents put on each other? What do we want to keep, if any? Or just even, do we just want to do away with what we grew up with and form our
Right.
own
Yeah.
plan together of what we feel will work for us in our marriage?
And one thing we've learned about being married for this long and about those types of expectations or communication issues is that I've heard it said to me, and many of you have heard me say this, there's two times in your life when you realize how selfish you really are. The first time is when you get married.
Yeah.
The second time is when you have children. And it comes to this place where you get into marriage and marriage or relationships when you have to look after someone else and when you have to love someone else, the way that God asks us to love our spouse sometimes is really challenging.
Right.
But marriage and relationships amplify all of those things in our life that are really, that maybe we're deficient in. That kind of relationship sometimes can just poke and prod at the things that really are struggle for us. And then when you get into that relationship, it's not like because now we're married, all problems go away and all the baggage I had is gone. You're carrying
Right.
those things that you have into your relationship with you. And just by communicating your expectations, man, you take some of the power away from them by just talking those things out.
That's right.
And getting past the maybe even the fear or the shame that maybe you have about a given situation. And we're not saying just dump everything on the first date.
Right.
But we're saying that it is position yourself in a way to actually build a relationship of communication and build a pattern of communication and actually expressing those expectations.
That's right. So, and these kind of seem, or they may seem small, but in reality, it's those small things, if they're left
Unchecked.
unchecked and unspoken, and like thinking to yourself that it's not a big deal. I can just like,
Right.
or he or she will just grow up and grow out of it, or the things that you tolerate, when you're dating and then you get married, those things might not fly anymore. And so, right, like it starts out small, but it grows. And let me tell you that the thing that's going to be the explosion, because that's gonna come, is not going to be about what you think the explosion was. It's that's the symptom. It's going to be, the root of it's going to be some uncommunicated expectation from days or weeks or months or years prior to that.
And the truth about even communicating those types of expectations is you can't just say it once. It's like when you get married, well, I told her I loved her.
Right.
That one time when we were at the altar, and that's the last time that I ever said I love you or showed any affection. It's not a one and done. And then there's like you gotta keep talking about those expectations. Communications oftentimes isn't just a one time, I'm done, everything is finished. Especially like when she says something to me from another room while I'm doing something in a different room and I don't really hear what she says, or so it's that kind of thing. If you only say it once, you're not really going to get the full weight of it sometimes, because sometimes we need to just continue on and communicate our way through that.
Right. And then it's not, like Brian said, it's not a one and done, because when I think back to our dating years, my expectations were way different than they were when we got engaged, and then they took a different turn when we were in our early years, and then we had kids. So it's an ever evolving thing, and I think you really set yourself up for success when you keep that kind of evolving and that conversation going throughout the various seasons.
And so not only do you want to communicate with your partner and make your expectations known, you really do want to make sure that they're actually achievable.
Right.
Which is, it's an interesting way
To put it.
because if it's not an achievable thing, it's not grounded if it's not grounded in some kind of reality. Like if she has an expectation that I'm gonna sew something on the kid's shoulder. That's not an expectation that's even realistic to me.
Right.
But If she says, hey, I need you to change the oil on the car,
Right.
that's realistic to me. I can do that. You need me, the expectation is on Saturday mornings at 10, we go out and mow the lawn. Okay,
Right.
cool. That's an expectation that I can. But if you're saying, "Hey, my expectation is that next week you walk from here all the way to Penticton and back to get me milk from that store that I like, and all the way back," that's not
That's
a
just
realistic, an unrealistic expectation, or whatever it may be in your relationship that maybe is a little bit unrealistic. And so it's not based on. It has to be based on what you know about the other person, not based on something you saw on Instagram or Facebook
TV. Like,
or TV.
Let's be real. Like, the movie industry or the romantic comedies, they've really set people up, I think, for challenges in this particular
Right.
area of expectations, because you see that and it's seemingly like the knight in shining armor or the prince, and he's doing all of the right things and he's just, doting, and he's so attentive, and she's just, infatuated and
You're gonna tell about
soaking
Orange
it
County?
up. I will say about Orange County, yeah. But it kind of gives you with this false sense of reality,
Right.
of what marriage, I mean, that would be amazing if that were actually how it was. And it's not to say that you can't work to get it to that place where it is fairy tale-ish, but the reality of it is it's not. And so one of the things that I really struggled with was, so I used to watch Housewives of Orange County.
If you're watching this show, stop now. She'll tell you why.
This might not be your situation, but for me, the thing that we had talked about previously, where we said it starts out small, and that starts to fester when these unmet expectations are not voiced. So, if you've never seen Housewives of Orange County, it's all of these rich families in Orange County who are on a reality show, I guess you could call it. And it's just them going about their day and them going about their life with very little to worry about. Everything's superficial. They've got all of the money in the world. They can just walk onto a car lot, purchase a vehicle for $63,000, pay cash for it, no big deal. And so while I'm watching this, I am a stay-at-home mom. My husband is working in his own business at that time. So like money is fluctuating. It's not really consistent. I have 2 kids at that time. I'm babysitting other people's kids in order to like bring in some extra income. And so this was how I was choosing to fill my day. Well, let me tell you, it didn't take very long before I started to be really ticked off that my husband, didn't have the education that guy had, and that why couldn't we walk onto a car lot and pay cash for a vehicle? And really started to fester and take root in my heart, his imperfections and the expectations that I had on him. Like, I never cared about what job you had, but after watching that, I sure cared. And it became this unvoiced, this unmet expectation, not even a realistic one, that I had taken hold of and harbored. And it was months and months and months. And I became really irritated and really angry with him. And I couldn't even figure out why I was so annoyed with his decision making, and annoyed with our vehicle, and annoyed with how much money was in the bank or how much money wasn't in the bank. And just like everything seemed to be such a struggle. And then one day the Lord spoke to my heart, like, you need to cut that off. You need
Right.
to cut that out of your life. And I was kind of like, what? I like this show. And then the Lord began to really speak to my heart about the toxicity of what it was doing to me in regards to how I was treating my husband, and the expectations that I had, these stupid expectations about, like, that's their life. That was not even the life that we were building together.
Right. And it became, and another thing that really crushes relationships is the comparison game. This is not part of the 4 things we want to talk about. I just want to bring it up as we're talking about it, is you are in a relationship with your spouse, with your partner, the person that you want to love and possibly live with for the rest of your life if you're dating.
Yeah.
Comparing your relationship to anyone else's and saying that that's what you want robs you two of the chance to have the thing that God wants you to have.
That's right.
Is that the comparison game breaks us. It separates us from the things, from the other person, because you're looking at, well, look at what her wife does, or look what her husband does, or look what that fiance does. It's so different than who you are. there's things that we can learn from other people, but we don't want to compare ourselves to what other people are doing.
And it's a slippery slope, because like Instagram is notorious for this, where everyone posts their highlight reel.
Right.
No one wants to post what real life is like. So, I'm going to post that my husband bought me, 4 dozen roses for whatever the occasion was, and write this whole big blurb about how amazing he is. And we've seen that kind of a thing on there. And I remember when I was just not in a good place with myself, where I would look at that and I'm like, how hard is it for you to buy flowers? How hard is it for you to just like, where's my 4 dozen roses? Like, so and so bought it for so and so, and like, look how happy they are. And it can be that wedge, that sneaky wedge that drives you two apart for something that, I mean, she didn't post about how awful her husband was to her that week, or how awful of a week she was having in general, right? And so really being mindful that what you're seeing people portray is not necessarily accurate.
That's right. That's very right. And so the next question that we're going to be sending you right away.
So, how many times a week do you feel that your expectations are not being met? Again, there's ladies are answering for themselves and the gentlemen are answering for themselves at the bottom.
And even as you're answering these questions, before we move on, we just this is meant to spark conversation between you and the person that you're with. It's not meant to be like, oh man, I can't believe how bad they are. So please don't approach these questions or what men when we're done with this webinar, we're going to have the talk of my life, and you're just it's going to be, no, we want you to just have open, clear communication about your expectations. And the way that we approach these things is that I wish people would have said these things to us when we were early dating.
Yeah.
We didn't have the benefit of having people speak into our life, or have the option to have Zoom webinars, or we didn't want to be around people because we were really struggling in our marriage. And so we take this as an opportunity to help people, to help you open up your possibilities.
Yeah.
If there's a communication pattern that's unhealthy, or an expectation that you haven't communicated, we just want to be able to help you move that needle in your life just a little bit more into being who God's called you to be, as a husband or as a wife, or as a potential husband or potential wife. And
if you're not, if you're here but you're not in a relationship, or you're not married and you're single, or you're dating, making sure that you're keeping tabs of what those expectations that you have. And if you've been in a previous relationship, using that as an opportunity to really hone in on what worked in that scenario, what didn't work, how did I feel about this happening or that happening, and really take note and make notes about sort of what you're willing to tolerate in a future relationship. Mm-hmm.
And so the very next thing is are known. They are oh boy, there's how you speak English. Our expectations are now known.
Yes.
And we have decided that we got to make these expectations achievable. The next thing that they are is we have to make sure that they're communicated.
Yes.
Right?
I think this one we can camp out here for just a bit.
So there's a way to communicate. And the way that you communicate is generally how we would be talking to you right now. Now, I wish I could say that we communicate this way, but we've had to, in the past, create boundaries on how we communicate with each other. Do I raise my voice? Am I going to because I'm kind of a driver. I kind of move forward, and I'm passionate, and I get a little bit argumentative sometimes. And so I had to learn that about myself, and Natalie had to learn that about me to make it work. And so you create boundaries in your communication. You communicate the expectations clearly and politely, right? Because I mean, if we are going to be honest about our relationship, and so words have the potential to either build up your spouse, or they have the potential to destroy your spouse, right? And I think being mindful of I've determined, I know what my expectation is. And if I don't know, I'm digging deep and self-reflecting. Right. I think that's so important for me to even recognize, is this my own expectation, or is this something that I've taken from someone else's expectations? Yeah. So doing that homework and really self-evaluating what my expectations even are.
then coming to that place where are they achievable? And I've had to literally write down my expectations to be like, okay, this seems a little ridiculous, or this is doable, or I think it's doable. And then coming to that place where I'm communicating with it, instead of coming at it from, I really hate when you never do this.
And wow, that's a good one.
Right?
That's
And
good.
I've done it. I have said it like that in the past. It's probably not going to get you the response that you're wanting, or the, what's the word? Like your
That you're
willingness.
not going to get the resolution by starting with "you should," "I hate when,"
Yeah.
"this is terrible." Start with the way you're approaching it. Makes like it actually matters that you create the right boundaries.
Like, we made the choice to speak to each other in a respectful way. Now, we have not always
What?
done that.
I'm just so you
Right?
know, I've been very good at it.
And so, and, oh dear. But the way that you choose to speak to your partner,
Right.
the tone of voice that you're using, the body language, really does matter.
Absolutely.
If you're wanting to come to a place where both individuals are on board with the expectations
Yeah.
within your relationship.
Right.
So creating boundaries and communication, really focusing on how are we speaking. And if he's choosing to use words that I have already articulated I find disrespectful, then I want to have that conversation about what these expectations are, but we're going to have that conversation when we've calmed down and when we are speaking to each other appropriately.
Right. And like you want to communicate the expectations clearly. How, like, one thing you want to do is you want to communicate clearly about the commitment in the relationship. Now, it sounds strange to say if you've already been married,
Right.
but some people look at certain things a little bit differently when it comes to, oh, I can do this or I can do that, and it doesn't show a committed heart to your spouse. And the way you behave shows a lot to your spouse. And so you
Yeah.
want to communicate the yeah, I'm yours and yours only. I'm not anyone else's. I'm
Yeah.
not communicating over Facebook to all these random girls. I'm not doing all these different things. You want to make sure that what you're doing honors your wife and the person you're going to be with,
Yeah.
and your fiance. You want to make sure that honors them, and that your commitment honors everything that you said and that you're willing to go into that relationship with. And so
That's
you
right.
communicate that clearly. You want to communicate verbally, regularly, those expectations, and say things like, I love you, verbal affection, I love you, I care
Yeah.
for you, I value you, you are worthy. And these are all the things that people need to hear. You want to communicate the compassion and the empathy you have for another. Natalie wants to bring up a story about me when I'm sick.
Okay, so, and what we're talking about of like verbal affection, these seriously were expectations that we didn't even think to communicate.
Right.
That I was like, well, because it wasn't one of the major ones, right? I mean, I thought how ridiculous for us to say, like, to really, this is my expectation that we're in a committed relationship. I thought it was very clear that we were in a committed relationship, right? But don't fall into that trap of like, well, duh, I thought it was obvious.
Mm-hmm.
It might not be that obvious. And so this compassion and empathy one is really huge, because when Brian is sick, and maybe you can relate,
Ladies.
well, we all kind of know, like, it's just not overreacted, but it just,
Wow.
it's more, there's more to them being sick than there should be, in my opinion.
When we say when I'm sick.
Yes, when Brian's sick.
So it's not.
Yeah, there's more, like, it seems to be such a big deal when it's like the sniffles or a cold or something like that. And so knowing that, and because I'm nurturing, and if he's home and he's sick, then I want to be taking care of him. And so I will go to the nth degree and make sure that he's got hot tea and soup, and make sure that, I'll even draw him a hot bath or whatever it might look like, because I have compassion on him. It's terrible to be sick, but it's not reciprocated the same way. And so when I'm not feeling well, there's a very low tolerance for my not feeling well, and almost this attitude of like, well, you're not really that sick, right? Do you want to?
I'm not going to defend myself, because she is not wrong. And that's not just with her. I have a low tolerance for that kind of stuff anyway. So
Yeah.
but
so
when,
I'm drawing my own bath and I'm getting my own
well,
suit.
it's not that
And
bad. But what I had to learn is that regardless of your feelings, the fact is she needs me to be taking care of her.
right.
And so regardless of how I feel about it, what my personal opinions are about
Or
it,
preferences.
is the expectation was communicated to, hey, Brian, when I'm sick, this is what I want.
Yeah.
I can do that. But for many years, that wasn't communicated, and I didn't respond well, and that caused a lot of trouble in our relationship because I'm not naturally very nurturing.
No, and that's not like
But
that's
it's
not
not
a bad thing.
It's just that's the way I go.
Right.
But over the years, as I've gotten older and more mature and wiser, I know when to pick the battles and when not to. And so now
Right.
I'm going to be like, you know what? Her expectation is this. I'm going to fulfill that because that's my
Right.
responsibility as her husband.
See, so just to camp there just for a little bit longer, not one time did Brian ever articulate, hey, this is what, if I'm not feeling well, do you think that maybe I would really appreciate if you brought me some soup or whatever. That was never communicated. And so I just did because that's what you should do. So then because I delivered it in such a way as that, of this is how one should be while one is sick, I really got to be in my bonnet when it wasn't reciprocated.
Right.
Like,
because it wasn't a communicated expectation and I
wasn't.
didn't see it the same way.
Right.
And so when we're going through these things, as you're communicating your compassion and empathy for each other's point of view,
Right.
that sometimes maybe that's different on how you're going to raise your kid. How are you going to, we have to make a financial decision. You have to consider each other in those things. How do you spend quality togetherness? Who initiates sex, physical closeness, that kind of thing, making time for each other. These are all expectations, like helping each other out with your meals, with your kids. Open and honest communication about all of that is going to save you so much complications.
And it might seem like this is a little redundant or this is a little ridiculous that we would have to talk about all of these things. But communicating the expectation of, hey, we're a team.
Yeah.
And he's not my enemy. Your spouse is not your enemy in this whole marriage or this whole relationship. And so we're going to treat each other with the respect because that's what's expected.
Yeah.
I'm expecting, and this is what we've communicated, I'm expecting that my husband is going to speak to me and treat me in a manner that's respectful.
Right.
And the physical closeness, right? It's not always his job to initiate sex in the bedroom or wherever. It's not, right? Like, these are the things that you need to talk about. Do you, honey, it would be nice if once in a while you could initiate in this particular area. And the helping out around the house, I think this has evolved for us over the years with the kids and stuff. But, if I'm working, there are times where I'm having a great day and I'm super productive and I'm able to get like dinner and blah, blah, blah on the table. And then there are other times where it's like with schooling the kids in this, like, I'm working and then it's on Brian's shoulders. But making sure that you're communicating that, hey, if I'm out, would it be okay if you took care of dinner tonight? Like, it doesn't have to be this big, huge conversation about it.
Right. And one of the things that we've heard before, but it says this, being right is not one of the fruits of the Spirit.
That's totally right.
Right? Like, it's not one of those things. That is not one of the fruits of the Spirit. This is being right in these situations. You want to be able to communicate things clearly and you may never have your point of view agreed with the person that you're with. But
That's
what they
right.
can do is we can honor each other, respect each other, and show each other that kind of care and love as you move forward in the relationship to be able to make it work.
And come to that place of understanding.
Right.
Right? It's not I'm not voicing my expectations to Brian so that I can be right.
Yeah.
Right? Because it's mutual. And so I want to be able to respect. He doesn't have to agree with all my expectations. And he's well within his rights to ask for clarification.
Yep.
Right? And it's not just like, well, here's what I'm expecting from you in this category. And that's it. Like, you can't ask for questions. You can't ask for clarification. There's no negotiating. It should not be like that.
Right.
I think it should be reciprocal.
Right. And so the next question is, are you ready for this?
All right. do I think my partner's expectations are realistic? So ladies, you will answer this in regards to, do you feel like your husband's or your boyfriend's expectations are realistic? And gentlemen, you will answer, do I feel like my wife's or do I feel like my girlfriend's expectations are realistic? So do not converse about whether or not you agree with that. You answer honestly.
So as we move forward with this one, just as we move into the last little bit of this, if there's any questions, anything you want clarification on, please in the bottom in the Q&A or the chat, just let us know, and we'd love the opportunity to answer any questions that you have for us. And
it can be totally anonymous.
It could be anonymous. It doesn't have to be this is who it is. We're not going to say anyone's
Right.
names if you have a question like that. So just let us. But the space is open and available for you, so we can answer some questions live as we move into this. And things about questions is if you're thinking it, there's a chance that someone else is thinking it as well.
That's right.
And so yeah.
And it doesn't, like, just to clarify, it doesn't have to be in regards to this particular topic. If there's a question that you've got burning on your mind in regards to
Right. And so just in the results on this one is that the question was, do I think my partner's expectations are realistic? About 67% of you answered sometimes.
for lady.
And
yeah.
so this is a really, for both
Yeah.
men and women.
right.
So this is a really great conversation starter for you to sit with your partner, look them in the eyes and say, what do you think is unrealistic?
Right.
That'll be homework for before you come for next week on the next Wednesday. But what do you think that I do or say, or what are my expectations that you think
Are not realistic.
Are not realistic.
And frankly, people, it's so freeing
Right.
when you come to that place, and you might not be able to articulate them verbally quite yet. You
Right.
might have to write them down just so that you get them out in the right way. And I really encourage you. I did that. And I really took a hard look in my own personal life. And it took me, I think, between the 10 and 12 year mark before I really was able to identify what unrealistic expectations that I had, what unmet expectations that I was harboring onto, and be able to communicate that on paper.
Right.
And so if it's not a verbal conversation yet, at least being able to take that time and really write down, hey, this is an unrealistic expectation that I feel like you're putting on me that we need to talk about.
Absolutely. So now the expectations are known.
Yeah.
They're achievable. They're communicated. The fourth and final piece of the puzzle is they are agreed upon.
That's right.
They are agreed upon. So you set these expectations so you can avoid resentments. Because
Yes.
what happens is that you can do all three of those things, but never agree on it, and so you don't come to any resolution onto the thing that you're trying to fix, or a thing that you're trying to agree on. So we said create clear roles and responsibilities. That is just in the house. Obviously, when you
Yeah.
have kids, you have relationships, you both have jobs, you're doing all these things. These are things that I do in the house. There's certain things that I do that she calls as a blue job or it's a pink job. But there's times where she's had to do blue jobs and I've had to do pink jobs. That's
Right.
just a fact of life. That's part of being in that relationship. But the expectations for those jobs are clear. And so I'm not taking on those pink jobs unless it's like, hey, she's like, I need help. Done. I can help you do that. And
That's
and
right.
vice versa. So you're communicating those clearly. And this is the thing, is that the issues you may have talked about. Maybe you touched on it in a conversation.
Yeah.
Maybe you were talking about something else and this one came up and you talked about it, and one of you or both of you think, hey, that was good enough, but it never came to a resolution. You never came to a place where it was agreed that we're going to work on this together, or
Right.
this is what the expectation is. And what that does is it just builds up. You build up. It could end up being in resentment or frustration or anger, and it ends up being something that maybe that was the straw
Yeah.
that broke the camel's back.
That's right. As an example, and this is just like a small example, but there was a time where I was going out and having some like girl time with my friends. And so I had let Brian know, and we had talked about that this was something that was on the schedule to happen. And so all I said was, I would really appreciate if you could have the dishes and the dishes done. That's what I said, when I get home. And he's like, yep, good, done. I got it. So I go out and I come home.
This doesn't end well for me.
And I came up the stairs and there was still a table full of stuff. All the counters were still cluttered and gross and hadn't been wiped or washed. The stove was still a mess, but the dishes were done. And I lost my mind. Because in my mind, doing the dishes doesn't simply mean just doing the dishes. It means making sure the table's wiped and cleaned,
Right.
making sure the stove is all wiped, all the countertops, everything's put back in the pantry if we've got like salt and pepper and seasonings and stuff out. And the dishes are done and the dishes are put away. But that's not what I articulated. I simply said, my expectation in this situation is that the dishes are done. And so using that as an example for whatever your situation might be, making sure that I'm clear with what all that entails.
Absolutely.
And you, not to make him feel like he's not capable of figuring that out, but really like, if I'm coming home and I'm expecting it to look a certain way, but then I've not told him, hey, can you please make sure the table's done? And can you please make sure all the countertops and yada, yada, yada are all clean?
And this is the thing. What's obvious to you or what you think is common sense may not be to the other person.
That's right.
Right? And it comes back just to some of those things that maybe you have different expectations because of the way things were done in the past.
Yeah.
Right? And so just moving on to, this is something, if you don't know what your partner's expectations are, your partner or whoever it is, spouse, boyfriend, girlfriend, is going to have a hard time reaching them because you might always be moving the goalpost.
That's so good.
So if you don't know what your expectations are, your partner will have a hard time reaching them because you might keep moving that goalpost. So if you don't even know what your expectations are and you're just constantly making it difficult for the person to actually reach those expectations,
You're setting them up for
you're
failure.
setting them up for failure and you're setting yourselves up for frustration.
That's right.
And for anger. So maybe some really tough fights and tough conversations. You need to work together as a team, as a unit, plant your flag in the ground. Some things are fluid. Like housework is fluid. That's
right.
a fluid thing. But how you raising your kids, you try things together. You work together. How you're going to date each other. How you're going to respond to your extended family. How you're going to do any of those types of things. A lot of these things are fluid.
Yeah.
But you want to work together. But if you don't have a flag planted, like this is an expectation I have. Sorry about that. If you don't have your flag planted onto the things that are important to you both, that you're working out together because you're working life together and you're just moving that goalpost, you're going to just set yourself up for frustration.
That's right. Like that example that I just gave about the dishes, that was me moving the goalpost.
Yeah.
So I left things out, and not purposefully. I just was like, It should be obvious, except that it isn't obvious all the time.
Right? And so the next one that we have is that
hurt, disappointment, and frustration result when there's a wide gap between what we expect and what actually happens. That is so important to get that.
So this is what we're wanting to help you with, if is to close the gap.
Yeah.
And so each partner knows what you expect, so you know what's actually going to happen. You know that when this situation arises, you've met those expectations, just so you can work together to make things that are healthy, healthy and whole. And so simple miscommunications can create those significant barriers, just like we said at the beginning. Significant, simple, small miscommunications can create significant barriers in a marriage and often share a common source, and that's in the way that we approach things, and it's all about those unmet expectations. And so just again, if there's any questions that you have, I do have a question from Aaron. Where can you get that ringtone? It's a really good question. It's I'm not even sure why it popped up or where that came from.
Right.
Yeah. So did you have any questions about anything? There's a chance right now to pop in and see if we can answer a question for you. If not, we're just going to take a second. We're going to pray with you guys, and we're going to move on. Let's give it a couple more minutes for any questions you have. And you can reach out to us after this through church, through Amplified Marriage at gmail.com. You can reach us there, or Brian at kcc.net. We would love to be able to hear from you and answer those questions directly if you don't want to ask them here. But we're here just to help people move that needle just a little bit more into having the best relationship that you possibly can.
So just to recap, if you need a formula, identifying what the expectation is,
Make it known.
And then really coming to terms in your own heart, can my spouse really achieve this? Or is this an expectation I've set for myself and has nothing to do with my spouse? Being able to differentiate that, I think, is so very important. And then communicating that in a respectful manner and making that your goal as spouses, as boyfriend and girlfriend, as fiancés, however they might be, that you will communicate in a respectful manner. And then making sure that you are coming to that place of understanding and coming to that place of, I'm not agreeing just to please Brian, and he's not agreeing just to please me, but coming at that place where we're like, hey, that's a doable expectation. Yeah, we're working together in this.
And you've agreed upon it.
That's right.
Absolutely. All right, well, let's just take a minute. I'm going to pray with you. Lord, thank you for the time that we had tonight. Thank you for people that are tuning in just to hear maybe a new pattern in the way they communicate and how they approach talking to each other and their expectations. Lord, we know that you're a good God and you want to see marriages that are healthy and whole and moving forward. Lord, so as they go about this week and as they reflect on these questions, some of these questions about unrealistic expectations and are they being met, Lord, that you meet them where they are. If their marriage is in trouble, you meet with them where they are. If their marriage is healthy, you meet with them where they are. Yeah. They're in between, you meet them where they are, Lord. And that they come away from this learning something new, being able to apply it to their own relationships, to maybe their own future relationships, to friendships, to whatever this is, Lord. But that this isn't just a one and done. That they come with an attitude and a heart to learn and to maybe shift that needle just a little bit more. So just bless each one of those people that are here as they go about their week and just learn more about each other, Lord. In Jesus' name, amen.
Amen.
Excellent, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. We are so glad that you came in today, and we're just happy that we were able to do this with you. And looking forward to seeing all of you next week.
That's right. New webinar, new topic.
And we'll wait until Wednesday to let you know what that topic is. It'll be a secret. All right. Bless you guys. Talk soon.